So when we look at our two types of inflation, demand pull inflation, which happens because of changes in aggregate demand, or our cost push inflation, which happens because of changes in aggregate supply. Remember, inflation means prices going up. And so if price is going up, that means then that more money needs to be spent. And then we want to take a look at the graph when this happens, because we can draw both of these at the same time. And so if we were to draw both of these at the same time, it kind of gives you an interesting snapshot of the United States over the course of many years. I mean, when I was your age, I made $375 and very quickly $425 an hour. And I was able to buy things for my life at $425 an hour. And that was 25 years ago. More than that. That was 27, 28 years ago. You at your age now make $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour. And so it's an interesting discussion to see how I was able to support my life and you're able to support your life, and I made way less than you. The reason that we contract this is because of what's called inflation. And so looking at this graph, we see our short run aggregate supply, and then we see our aggregate demand. And so in this instance, I'm going to just label it like so, and I'm not going to show the quantity lines here, because an interesting thing to do here is to take a look at like the long-term effect of inflation. See, in the short run, what you'll see is that the government of the United States will use fiscal policy, or the banking system of the United States will use what's called monetary policy to try to influence this. That said, in the long run, we see interesting things happen. So for example, we know that over the course of time, our incomes go up. Now, incomes going up in the short run enable us, like so, to buy more stuff. This aggregate demand becomes a new short-run equilibrium there. But what we see happening then is that because we're making more wages, the cost of inputs for businesses increase, and that is bad for supply. This causes a shift to the left of supply. When price of inputs goes up, this is going to decrease supply. And when it decreases, it shifts to the left. To the left, to the left. And so what we do is we have to draw on roughly on the same graph something that looks like this. Here, I'm just going to put a supply 1 there. Now, this is a response curve. And so in the short run, it might have been there. But what we see in the long run is it ends up there. And so if you're really looking closely at this graph, we see that once upon a time, when I was your age, prices were here. But years later, prices are here. And now what's really interesting is if you think about this with the long run aggregate supply, what you see is that the long run aggregate supply is always going to be there. And that is our natural rate of output, or full employment. I'll write natural rate of output. You could think of this kind of like a Christmas tree if you look at it, because of the colors that I'm using. And so years pass, our incomes go up. But because of the change in aggregate supply, we still only have the same amount of stuff. My dad in 1960 made like $4,000 on the year for the entire year. In that era, that enabled him to have a house, a car, and put food on the table with clothes for the kids. They were living check to check, but it was enough. And so to do this one more time, I mean, I can just continue the lesson here. Short run aggregate demand shifts like so. Years later, that gave us a new short run equilibrium. You could pick a spot. But in response, the short run aggregate supply is going to move as well. And then you see that our new supply ends up there. Now it is looking like a Christmas tree effect. You can see if we wanted to add this, here was the average price level. Let's call this 1960. Here's the average price level. We can call this when I was your age, so 1994. And then here is the average price level for you, 2021. And you kind of do get a sense that it's a Christmas tree if you look at it a little bit, because the combination of demand pull inflation and the combination of cost push inflation causes this. As we get more money, we spend more, but businesses are hurt by this because they have to pay us more and it slips left. But because we're paying more for the same stuff, it eventually equals out. And this is a big reason why minimum wage sounds like a nice idea, but in the short run, it is helpful. But in the long run, it just goes back to where the natural rate always was. So ladies and gentlemen, this is called demand pull and cost push inflation. And this is a graph that demonstrates what happens because of inflation to price level in the long